I am headed down. Well, actually, I'm parked at the side apparently. But I am headed down Highway 12, headed east. We will end this trip in McLaughlin, South Dakota. So we're in South Dakota right now. We've come through, I can't remember the order, but Watauga and Morristown, South Dakota. And I started this video several times. I actually had audio recorded about halfway and then I erased it. I originally was going to try and do sort of a humorous, here's some propaganda about why to teach in small schools. And I was going to do this 7 types of propaganda and use them. And you might have heard paper rattling there. That's because I'm holding the list. But then as I got going through the week, I actually had a phone call looking for my opinions on healthcare. I won't tell you which political side it obviously was, but it was using such obvious propaganda. They said they wanted my opinion, but what they really wanted was for me to come down on one particular side on the healthcare debate. And it was so obvious from the words they were using. So in this video, I'm going to be more blatant. Sorry, I just dropped my list. I'm going to talk about 7 types of propaganda, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the effects, and then toward the end of the video, we'll go through McLaughlin, South Dakota, and then I'm going to share a little bit about McLaughlin. So, first of all, I suppose I should explain what propaganda is. The definition that I have, and you have the link down below, it's spreading rumors, false or correct information or an idea in order to influence the opinion of the society. You might be trying to advance an idea, you might be trying to shut down an idea. And propaganda, anytime politicians are running, that's often propaganda. When people are trying to get you to vote for or against a particular bill, that's generally propaganda. Yes, you can find the well-reasoned discussions, but more often it's propaganda. And the reason it works is, first of all, we don't always realize it's propaganda. That's a big one, actually. And then the second reason is it's mostly designed to appeal to emotion, not reason. And I think I discussed that over one of my driving videos over the winter when I talked about changing minds. And I talked about how, you do need to use your emotions a little bit. None of us work purely on reason. And that's true. So that's not really what propaganda is, though. Propaganda is targeting those emotions to shut down the reasoning part of the brain. So, I've found generally there's 7 types of propaganda that they talk about. There's more than this, of course. This is not an exhaustive list, but we'll start with these 7 for this video. Mainly because I found a cool looking little chart that I'll put a link for down below. So one of them, the first one on my list here, is card stacking. And here's the deal with card stacking. What you want to do is focus on the best things of your deal. And you leave out the bad things. You may even lie about the bad things. So you might, for example, have some new policy. And you say, free college for all. And then you leave out how much taxes will have to change in order to accomplish that. Or you might say $20 minimum wage, $20 an hour minimum wage. And you leave out that what that'll do to prices. And that doesn't mean I agree or disagree with either of those. Those are just 2 I thought of. And I didn't feel like trying to invent a liberal and a conservative example. So you'll probably find both sprinkled throughout here. But that's what card stacking is. You see what's best about it. In fact, I was going to do a lot of card stacking with my small school's slightly humorous video. Because I was going to lay on thick all the good points, and then I was going to sarcastically talk about some of the bad points and say, but we won't talk about those. So that was the idea. But I think it would have come off as a very negative video, and that was not my intent when talking about small schools. I think if I do a small school video, I want to do a sincere video. So it's better I didn't go that way. So here's another good piece of propaganda, and you'll see this in advertising all the time. And by the way, propaganda, that's what advertising often is. Testimonials. Now what I think is kind of fun is you will also find people who are not well known, but testimonials are, you often get a well-known person to endorse your product. You could say, well, Bernie Sanders supports this, and you're like, oh, okay, well, Bernie supports it, oh, god dang. On the right-wing side, Donald Trump, well, okay, he's kind of losing popularity. He's probably not the best example. For his diehard base, he's definitely used, though. When we've had special elections to replace some of these legislators, he was actually used, his recorded voice, not him personally, his recorded voice was used to encourage people to vote for the Republican candidates. State to the west of me, Mr. Puncher, oh, what was he, Giancola, something like that. I had to think about that. Gianforte, the guy that attacked the reporter for asking him questions. Trump was an important part of getting him elected there. Now, I will admit that situation's a bit more complicated than people would have you believe. But, well, that's what a testimonial is. You get somebody popular. This whole anti-vaxxer stuff, Jennifer McCarthy. She's not being used for propaganda, anti-vaccination purposes because she is a knowledgeable scientist who knows the science behind the dangers of vaccination. She's being used because she's an actress and she's somewhat known to people. Propaganda, that's a testimonial. You'll see interesting versions of that in advertising because people have started to catch on to that one sometimes. So you'll see, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. Or you just plain folks, which is actually one of the other methods of propaganda, so I'll save that one here. My third one here is glittering generalities. And that's using words or ideas that evoke an emotional response. The call that I got that got me thinking I want to do just a straight out propaganda video, he used the phrase North Dakotans over and over again, except he was from Las Vegas, so he didn't know how to pronounce it. So he kept calling us North Dakotians, which was annoying. But anyway, he was trying to appeal, to that, oh, I'm one of them type of thing. Freedom, liberty. Those are all examples. Honor, social justice, democracy, the American way. Those are all words that are used to appeal to an emotion and shut down the critical thinking. And the article, sorry, I'm stammering tonight, and I really apologize for that. But the article that I found actually talks about virtue words. So that's a good way of putting it. And then, of course, there is transfer. You relate a product to someone or something we like. When I say, well, the American system, we love America. If we're trying to appeal to perhaps somebody who's more liberal, we might say, well, the European model of medicine, oh, I'm not going to think about it, it's European, that's good. And socialist, Bernie Sanders had a lot of trouble over the word socialist. You can use it in a negative way too, which I noticed that this page did not actually talk about. Because you can relate things to things we don't like. Socialist is a thing we are trained in the United States to think socialism equals communism, which it does not. But transfer is a nice, easy way because you associate, and you might notice some crossover here with logical fallacies, by the way. But you just say, oh, it's kind of like, well, okay, here's an example. Food products are often related to certain states. North Dakota wheat. Really, is North Dakota wheat any different tasting than Kansas wheat or Nebraska wheat? No. But you get that association. California vegetables. Oh, good vegetables and fruit come from California. Texas oranges. We're trying to get this transfer. We attach it to things we like. Newman's Own. It's a brand of. It's a food brand. I know they make salad dressing. I don't know what all they make. But the idea is to associate it all with Paul Newman. Now, what's Paul Newman have to do with food? Not much. He's no cook. So, but transfer is a method of propaganda. And what I alluded to by accident earlier is plain folks. Think about Richard Nixon babbling about the silent majority. This whole, and that was part of what got me on this phone call I had, is it's all relating, the normal person. Well, who is the normal person? A lot of the normal people are easily led by propaganda, including propaganda saying this is what the normal person believes. And we don't know we're doing it. We're all susceptible to propaganda to one degree or another, especially if it agrees with our biases. But that's a very popular one. You look on news websites on the extreme right or the extreme left, they love this one. And it's effective because we like to think of ourselves as plain folks. And this is why politicians will embarrass themselves, eating gross, deep fat fried pickles at the Iowa State Fair. Going to this, putting up with a stupid Iowa straw poll. What was his name? A couple years ago. John Kerry. All right, John Kerry was infamous for going into a store and saying, and I roughly quote, "Can I get me a hunting license?" With those words. John Kerry does not talk like that. It was an attempt to sound like plain folks. And the right-wing media went nuts with that. Portrayed him as an elitist, trying to be just plain folks. Whereas their candidate, of course, was a just plain folk. I believe it was one of the George Bushes. In fact, I'm sure it was. Can't remember which election it was, but it was George Bush. Now I'm sure. When Barack Obama was president and he went to a burger place, why'd he go to a burger place? He's trying to portray himself as just plain folk. And then he ordered a burger with spicy mustard, and he was looking for like a Dijon or something. And again, right-wing media, Sean Hannity going nuts about him being an elitist, making fun of the type of mustard he wanted on it. Sorry, I'm doing all these examples. But I remember during one of the election campaigns, and I don't remember which one, people were talking about food prices, and Barack Obama is like, "Oh yeah, here's me. I can be just plain folks. Have you seen the price of arugula lately?" And again, right-wing media, "Oh, he's an elitist because he eats arugula." It cuts both ways with this propaganda. And gotta watch out for that. I mean, really? Wouldn't it be nice if right now our scandal with our president was what type of mustard he has on his burger? Just saying. So just plain folks has no particular virtue, but in propaganda, it does. Because we all like to think of ourselves as typical Americans. I mean, I think of myself as a typical teacher in small-town North Dakota. Bandwagon, that actually goes along with plain folks, but that's getting people to join in because everybody's doing it. Especially when you couple it with some of the other methods, like the very last one, which is name-calling, which also goes along with a few of the others I mentioned. But that's trying to get everybody to join in. So, that language in the phone call I had, that survey, where they kept talking about North Dakotans want. How do you know what North Dakotans want? Is this survey really about finding out what North Dakotans want? Or is it we've decided what we want North Dakotans to want, and now we're going to construct our survey so that we get the results we want to support that. So there's a really classic scene in, I can't remember if it was Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister. It's an old British series where they use an example of a poll and just constructing the questions in a different way to get totally different opinions. That's actually a very good, if you don't mind a little bit of cynicism, that's actually a very good series for getting a view of how politics works. And my U.S. listeners might say, well, that's British politics. Our government may be constructed slightly differently, but the same games go on in our government as go on in the British government. So very clever one. So, but Bandwagon, just getting people to join the crowd. Don't be left out. That's a popular one. In advertising, keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, they may have not used that word, but that was the idea. The ring around the collar. I remember those ads, that sing-songy voice. Back when I was a kid in the 80s on the TV. Like, ring around the collar was some horrible thing, and housewives, because remember it was the 80s, were going to be judged as bad mothers because their kids had, or their husband had ring around the collar. Well, how often do you really notice that? And how bad can it be? So, that's all Bandwagon. Now, you can also use name calling. That's the 7th technique. What you're doing there, that's more negative. Propaganda can be very effective, especially if you tie it to positive emotions. I mean, what candidate for office does not festoon themselves with American flags in the United States? If you're Canadian, don't do that. That's dumb. There was a big deal because they got a photograph of the Democratic convention where there was no American flags. Well, it's because it was kind of between graphics and somebody just happened to snap a shot right at that instant. Both stages, Republican and Democrat, were drenched in flags. But, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton liked to tie him to the word socialist. Because in this country, socialist is bad. In part because most people don't understand what it is, which might be a topic for another video. I'll guarantee 2018 midterms, the people on the Democratic side are going to be pinning all the Republicans to Donald Trump. Why? Because for the majority of voters, that's something negative. Now, with a certain element of the Republican base, that's a positive, so that could backfire, but that is always a risk with propaganda, that it could backfire. I have heard people kind of on the progressive side, I've even said this too, I might have even put it in a video once in a while, saying there are elements in North Dakota trying to turn this state into the Mississippi of the North. Well, why are we saying that? Because we've associated a lot of trends and things in Mississippi with bad. Racism, poor education system, overabundance of religion in the public square. We consider those bad, and those are all associations people have with Mississippi. They may not have even thought them through that deeply. They may have thought them through more deeply. Or they may just, in general, oh, Mississippi's bad. So I want to give you a couple examples of how propaganda has infiltrated our society. One would be the Pledge of Allegiance, which may sound a little bizarre to some of you from other countries, and I apologize again. We actually have schools in this country where they recite it every day. I went to one of them. I'm happy to say I don't teach in one now. But anyway, I'll just recite the Pledge of Allegiance and make my point with it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, those of you who are U.S. listeners probably noticed I omitted something. On purpose. I mean, I knew I was omitting it, and that's why it was kind of awkward, and I had to read it, because it's ingrained in me to use it. The actual pledge is, I'll try this again. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, that's 2 extra words added to the pledge. It's kind of silly words because which God? Is it under Allah? Is it under Vishnu? I'm not sure. Well, we all know which God it is because this came out of the 1950s. Prior to the 1950s, under God wasn't in the Pledge of Allegiance. This was part of the propaganda, Cold War propaganda, about the godless commies. One of the differences between us and the godless commies is we're a Christian nation. And you still find a lot of people swallowing that propaganda. Well, we're not. The truth is, our founding fathers knew full well the dangers of mixing religion and government. Now, were they atheists? No. But they knew you need to keep religion out of government. You have to keep them separate. Some of them wanted a Christian populace and all that, but they knew religion can't be in government because they had seen, as contemporary history, what happens when religion's in government. The Salem witch trials were not ancient history to our founding fathers. The religious persecution going on in Europe was not ancient history to our founding fathers. And our founding fathers also knew, yes, they were all different branches of Christianity, but they knew that the different colonies were Puritans, Quakers, Catholics, and so on. Church of England. So they knew, let's keep the religion out of it. But when it became convenient for propaganda purposes, it was brought in. Now, I'm going to let that thought lie there. I'm just getting excited, so it's kind of a shame we're getting here. This is the town of McLaughlin. It's in Corson County, South Dakota. It's actually on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, which extends across the state line into North Dakota. In fact, in the next video, we will go through the town of Standing Rock. It'll be another one like this where I use footage from an earlier trip to take you around Standing Rock. But check out those grain elevators. I mean, there's rail here, they stop, and so a lot of people come into McLaughlin with grain. At 663 people, McLaughlin is the largest city on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. Has a okay main street. The Family Dollar is new since I moved to this corner of the state, so that provides a few more lower cost shopping options, which is probably good. I'm not sure how much harm that did to the main street. We'll see another Family Dollar in Standing Rock later. But it does give more reason to come to McLaughlin for people shopping in this area. Because if you know this part of South Dakota, there's not a lot around. You have to go down to Mobridge to get much. So here I am headed... Actually, this is from a week before. I'm headed south on, I think it's 63. Stopping at Highway 12. This is where I actually turned north previously. But I'm trying to make it look like I turned south and the special effects failed. So Senec's there, they've got gas and so on. We'll drive up Main Street. There's some businesses here, there's a few others on the other side. Like a lot of small town main streets, there's also a lot of businesses closed. That has nothing to do with being on the reservation, it has to do with being small town Dakotas. That's just a reality in the Dakotas. I lived in the Dakotas for long enough. I think I'm safe saying that. I've moved to the Dakotas in 1999. I don't know much about McLaughlin, really. I know that a few years ago they built a new high school, which we will swoop through. They tore down the old high school, which may or may not have been necessary. You know, I know the building was tough and it needed some work, TLC and whatnot. This is the school here. I can't remember if this is the high school part or the elementary part. But right here where I'm going to turn in, yeah, right here, there used to be a big, tall, right there, big, tall, like 3-story brick building. And you're going to see photographs of it in a minute. It's gone. And it was tough looking, especially around the back. My photograph is only of the front of the building, but You'll get the idea. And let's see. I guess you could still swoop through the parking lot or through the front just like I did there. But yeah, that's the old school that they tore down. So I say good for them. I mean, yes, I like to keep old buildings. But there does come a point sometimes when they just need to go. I don't know if this one was at that point, but I do know school districts with similar buildings where they are at that point. So good for them. I think it was expensive. Oops, sorry. I think it was expensive. I know they ended up laying off a few teachers to pay for it. I'm not a fan of that, but it may have been necessary because I've known of several districts in South Dakota that got in trouble because they let their building get in such horrible shape that the state was about ready to shut them down. And for South Dakota to get to that point, that's pretty bad. I don't know if McLaughlin was there, so make that clear. I'm going to go back by means of one of the back streets. You used to be able to come in behind the school somewhere. I don't remember exactly where. And it was kind of cool because the building, I wish I'd taken a picture of it. I don't know why I didn't. But you used to be able to come in around the back of the school, and it was very cool from the back because it just looked even more retro than it does from the front. It was just like going back in time to go behind that school. But I do think it's cool that McLaughlin has put their school not necessarily at the head of Main Street, but on Main Street. It's like they're saying, hey, this is a building that's important to us. Now, are there problems there? Absolutely, and I'll let other voices share those. McLaughlin isn't my town, so I won't go into that. But, yeah, it's a nice little small town. It's honestly one of the big strikes against it, and I don't think this is me being unfair, is that it is so far away from everything. And it's very hard for a town to really grow when it's really isolated. Unless it has something like good jobs or whatever to bring people in. And I guess McLaughlin seems to hold its own. Let me just double check the population trend if I have them. Yeah, McLaughlin seems to have undergone a slow decline over the years, but nothing too bad. There's abandoned houses in McLaughlin, so they must have lost some people. But it's not like a lot of towns. And that may have something to do, I don't know why. I'm not going to comment, but I was just noticing 663 people now. At its highest population that I can find, the 1960 census has 983 people, and the 2000 census had 775 people. And it's estimated, you hear the motorcycle? It's estimated to have grown just a teeny bit since the last census in 2010. So, good for them. So we're turning north now onto Highway 63. This is going to take us into North Dakota. Now, what I find interesting on this route, in fact, I'm going to do a different video to explore it, possibly. It may not be soon. But along this route, I've mentioned a book called Prairie School by Lois Lenski, which some viewers of the channel helped me find. This country, northeast of McLaughlin, is where it took place, in a little town called Maple Leaf, which most maps you can't even find. You can find it on Google Maps. Looks like there's a grain elevator there. That's about it. So I'm thinking, because I have to go to Bismarck. Actually, the day I upload this video, I will be going to Bismarck that afternoon. I'm thinking about leaving early, going this way, which I didn't really want to because it is a lot more time on the trip, but taking a detour over, see if I can find Maple Leaf. Now, The air conditioning in my car needs to be recharged, and I can't get the car into the garage in time before this trip. So if it's too hot that day, I may not, and I'll take the shortest possible trip. But because I'm a wimp. But yeah, that's something I'm going to consider. But anyway, back to the propaganda thing. So I mentioned the "Under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance. Another one, "In God We Trust," is on all of our money. And people, again, would be offended if it said "In Allah We Trust" or "Vishnu We Trust" or whatever. But that's been established, again, because of that communist scare in the 1950s. That whole atomic bomb drills that they used to have kids do in schools where they duck and cover under the desks. Part of the reason for that was just to keep that constant fear of the godless commies. My father is actually a little old to remember it. He was prior to that time, but my mother went to school during that time, and she remembers being awake at night terrified that the Russians were going to come bomb her little small town in rural Pennsylvania. That's how effective the propaganda was. I went to elementary school in the 80s, and I had teachers who were telling us how evil the Russians were all the time. We weren't doing duck and cover anymore, but I also remember in kindergarten we did a prayer before snack time. You know, they were still doing the religion and the anti-Russian propaganda. In fact, it's been so effective that you still find a majority of people, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say a majority, but more people will not vote for an atheist for office than would vote for somebody, a believer of a religion different from their own. People don't like atheists. There are still laws in the books in some states in this country that atheists cannot hold public office. In Arizona recently, an atheist did the prayer before the legislature, was the invocation, and immediately some Christian had to jump in and do a prayer. You know, they don't like that. Atheists have to fight to do a prayer. And, you know, they were citing some stupid law about, well, it has to be to a supernatural power. All over this country, atheists have to fight to do invocation before city council meetings. You know, it's just silly that in the 21st century we're still asking some supernatural critter to, you know, our imaginary friend to guide us in our meeting, because by golly, he's not going to guide us if we don't ask him to. It's all part of that propaganda. Whether it's intentional or it's become institutionalized and people have forgotten why they're doing it. The Supreme Court doesn't have a problem with "In God We Trust." You see police departments trying to put it on their cars now. You know, they're doing it because they want to have Jesus on their car, but they get away with it because this thing got so institutionalized, this propaganda, that it's a secular God, whatever that is. Which is why organizations like Freedom from Religion Foundation are fighting what seem like really picayune minor matters, so they don't get institutionalized, like "In God We Trust" or the "One Nation Under God" thing in the Pledge of Allegiance. And one other place I've been seeing propaganda used a lot lately is a lot of these political memes. And you might be wondering what a meme is. That's a humorous meme. I don't know if it's too political, but you'll see a lot of memes out there. Your more politically oriented friends and relatives have probably been posting them that put up some pithy little saying and totally miss any kind of nuance in the argument. They're just trying to influence. And here's a right-wing one that's obviously totally based on emotion. No nuance in this whatsoever. And let's throw a little balance into this. And what they're looking for is not discussion of issues. We're not looking for where do we agree, where do we disagree. These memes are all about emotion. And of course, when you agree with them, you're like, "Ugh, gotcha!" gotcha Republicans or gotcha Democrats. And without actually solving anything, but it makes you feel like you've won the argument because you found some pithy little meme. That's a modern form of propaganda. All emotional appeal, no logic. And that's the problem with propaganda. But in the defense of memes, sometimes they're just funny. I had to share this one. Alright, so let's just finish up the propaganda thought. Some of you might have seen the 1951 science fiction movie, Day the Earth Stood Still. It's about a flying saucer lands in Washington, D.C., and the alien looks human, so he's able to hide among the humans. So you have to watch the movie for it to make sense, but he's babysitting a woman's son, so he takes the son to the park, and the son, of course, wants to go see the flying saucer, so the alien's like, sure. And there's a reporter walking around with I can't remember if it's a TV or radio, but it doesn't matter. But it must be radio because he's narrating. He says, well, I see here a man with his little boy. What do you think, son? And of course the boy's like, biggest flying saucer I ever saw. And then he turns to Klaatu, the alien, and he says, and you, sir, I suppose you're just as scared as the rest of us. And Klaatu says, well, in a different way, perhaps. I am fearful when I see people substituting fear for reason. And the guy yanks the microphone back and says, thank you, sir. And he moves on. Because what do they want? Drum up fear. I thought it was clever that a 1950s movie was making that point. But you'll actually see a lot of clever things slipped into these 1950s movies if you pay attention to them that you wouldn't expect. Now, I passed the point I actually wanted to stop at. So I might rerun part of that. We'll see. We're in North Dakota now. No, actually at the blue sign we're in North Dakota. But I will come back to this because I want to talk about propaganda some more because that was actually very interesting to research. And I am thinking about, I don't know if I'll do it, but I'm thinking about going and finding that school over in Maple Leaf. It's a few miles off the highway. But I'm going to rewatch that footage, see how many roads turn off to the east, because it is to the east. And I'm going to see if I can find it. You won't see the school, because from satellite images it's gone. But by golly, I'm sure there's something there, because I see a building. It looks like it might be on private land, and I might not be able to get to it. But I'll bring my telephoto lens, and we'll see what we can do. So until next time, and no guarantees that that'll happen, but if it doesn't happen, I'll talk briefly about the book. So until then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.